Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another episode of In the Frame. Today's subject is John Krish, who is a director that I wasn't really that familiar with. And then you realise you might have seen some of his work. He started off in documentary film, did some features, did some information films in the 70s, the ones that appear in the Charlie Says compilation, which I did videos on, and then he went back to do documentaries. So the first thing I probably saw, apart from those TV adverts that scared the hell out of you in the 70s, is Unearthly Stranger with John Neville, which is a nice little British science fiction film from 1963. But it was only really watching Captured, which is another BFI Flipside edition. This is number 26. And again, DVD and Blu-ray and booklet. You really get a sense of John Krish and what he's all about. This is a wonderful package that, if you're interested, I would highly recommend picking up. So Captured was made in 1959 at the behest of the Ministry of Defence, and it's a film about how during the Korean War the Chinese forces would try and brainwash British troops. So originally there was an advisor to the film, to Krish, but he actually had to leave the project because what Krish was doing was so realistic. He couldn't actually take it anymore. The intro to the film is by some officer who speaks to the screen and says, you know, this is how it really happened. And there's not necessarily any stars in the film, but it's really authentic and real. The Chinese actors are actually non-actors. They were waiters that Krish found in London. He did actually approach Burt Kwok, who was obviously at the time the go-to Chinese actor in British films, but he actually wanted more money than the whole budget, so Krish ended up using non-actors in the roles of the Chinese interrogators. It pretty much tells the story of soldiers dumped in this camp because they used to put them into cabins that really held 3 people, and they used to put 12 soldiers in, so everybody was uncomfortable, and Krish recreated that in these sets in the studio. So no matter where an actor turned or got up or moved about, he was always brushing against somebody else. It was very claustrophobic, and it kind of follows some of the tactics the Chinese and Koreans used. So they'll give a little bit of information to get other bits of information from prisoners, who they didn't call prisoners, they called them students, because they were learning how the West lied to them, and to learn how communism is wonderful. There are scenes of like waterboarding, which are really effective, and again for 1959 pretty hardcore. In fact, nobody actually wanted to waterboard one of the actors, so John Krish, the director, had to do it himself. And he says that he went home afterwards and was actually feeling like he had tortured somebody for the day. It's only about 65 minutes long, and it's shot really quite skillfully. And again, it's how kind of guilt and assumptions can be thrown around to break the group up, to break the solidarity of the group. Um, it's just a wonderful, thought-provoking film that I would highly recommend. But again, the rest of this release is so good as well. So we see a couple of his kind of information films in the 70s that used to go on television to scare people about safety issues. So the first one is Sewing Machine from 1973, which it's essentially the last minute of a little girl's life. Again, these are like adverts or films that you just couldn't make nowadays. And this is a famous one. I remember seeing it at some point, not just on the Charlie Says set, I think this is in. And it's the clock on screen of a minute, and it's a mother sitting at a sewing machine, and the little girl's playing outside in the front garden, and the mother says, "I'll be with you in a minute." And then the voiceover says, a minute can last a long time, especially if it's your last minute alive, or words to that effect. So the little girl is playing, she goes out on the pavement, and then she sees her best friend across the road and waves at her, and then runs to see her best friend, and we see a car approaching and a thud, and then we just have a freeze frame of the mother's face for what seems like a very long time. So when this came out in 1973, there was lots of complaints, but the complaints were actually because the little girl's best friend was actually black. So their big problem with it wasn't pretty much the killing of a child. It was the fact that the little white girl's best friend was a black girl. And that was like well out of order, 1973. I should have said that Captured, the Ministry of Defence, when they saw the film, said that's exactly what we want, but you can't actually release it to the general public. So Captured was actually essentially banned for 41 years. I should have mentioned that. It's a common theme in Krish's work. And then we have Searching from 1974, which is one of those 1 minute scare the hell out of you if you're a kid, or in this case out of everybody, because the camera just goes into a house that's been burned by fire, and it just goes through the wreckage of this burned house, and the soundtrack is the screams of the children and the family members trying to escape the blaze. So again, it's like these things are just like so brutal, you just wouldn't get away with it nowadays. But then we have HMP, or Her Majesty's Prisons, from 1976, which is a 55-minute documentary. So he was asked to make a film pretty much advertising the prison service as a recruitment film for the prison service. Originally, the remit was show the different kinds of buildings that are in prisons, and he was like, there's no film here, there's nothing. If you actually want people to join the prison service, you actually have to show them what's involved with the job. So that's what he did. He went to HMP Maidstone, and he uses a device of, again, there's no actors in the film, he uses 3 new recruit officers, and they're being shown round the prison and the different parts of the prison, and it's 55 minutes long. It could be 3 hours long because it's absolutely fascinating. This is 1976, and again, as Krish says, it's kind of like we haven't really solved the whole crime and punishment thing. It's absolutely fascinating because the three different recruits have got three different characters to them. One of them is very kind of, the prisoners should be punished. Where's all the punishment? I need to see punishment. Um, there's an amazing scene where they talk to the prison priest, and he's there and saying, I don't see them as a client, or the way a doctor or a psychologist would see them. I see them like as a soul, and you're trying to not necessarily change them, but to make them understand who they are and what they are and how we can move forward and maybe help so they don't come back. And you can see the confusion on one of the trainees' faces when he's like, are they not here to be punished? Why are we like holding their hands? They should be punished. Um, there is an interview with Krish from 2013, which is 35 minutes, which again could easily have been a couple of hours because he's absolutely fascinating, he's funny, and he tells these wonderful stories. So the editor he was going to use on the prison documentary was this young guy who he thought, he'll give him a break, like he got and start in the industry. But he realised when they actually started, he was like a hard line, they should bring back capital punishment, prisoners should be punished as soon as they come in, it should just be the hard line. So he's like, this isn't going to work. So he gave him the offer of, you leave the project or you become the assistant editor. So the guy agreed to be the assistant editor, so Krish edited the film himself. Again, as he says, it doesn't matter whether you're making documentary films or feature films, it's to make the audience think about what they've seen and ask questions. And certainly the prison one does ask questions, because we, the audience, are essentially the three trainees who are asking these questions. I mentioned the scene with the priest, and it's a great scene, even though it's real, because they do argue a little bit as far as, I don't understand why these guys should be punished. They shouldn't be like helped. There's a great interview or a chat with the warden. Lots of the guards have different experiences. The warden's talking about, when they have the wives and children come in, you have to try and understand that as a human being, because sometimes the children don't recognise the fathers, or they've been away for. And one of the trainees who was in the Navy for like 20 years, kind of said, well, I actually appreciate that, because I come back and my children kind of act strangely around me initially because they don't, because they haven't seen me for so long. And again, the warden saying, well, that's the kind of empathy that you kind of need to have for the job. I mean, obviously in prison films in general, the screws are always just looked at as kind of one-dimensional characters in the vision of authority. But again, early on, there's one of the guards that are pretty much saying, we're not the judge and jury, we're not police officers, that's not our role. And again, you're in prison not to the extent that the prisoners are, but you're still there, so you need to have like a relationship with them to actually make things work as easily as possible, because again, prison guards are way outnumbered compared to the actual prisoners. So I mean, it's just an absolutely fascinating documentary, just the way Krish kind of sets it up and uses those tools. It's probably the most informative prison documentary I've seen, apart from as far as how does the prison service actually work. They go and see, there's a kind of I was going to say motel, but it's not really a motel. It's kind of, they move from prison into here as a way of kind of acclimatizing them before they're released. So there's guys who have been in there for 20 years and then they go into this kind of hostel for the 6 months before they're released, once they get word that they're going to be released, just to try and kind of acclimatise them to the outside a bit more. Because as we know from watching the Shawshank Redemption, sometimes people can get out and then they're desperate to go back because that's the structure that they're used to. And this, no walls and a big sky can freak long-term prisoners out. It's just a wonderful film. There's some humour. The fact that one of the guards is like, I'm known as a hardliner, but I'm fair, and it's it's well known that everybody calls me the bastard, just because I will stop stuff and report stuff, but again, I'm fair. One of the trainees asks, what about sex? The guard obviously says not now. But they talk about that, and obviously there's homosexual acts that happen, and he's like, oh, when you look through a peephole and you see that, do you just like shut it again and then walk away? And it's like, well, no, because some of the people in here are sexual criminals, so it obviously might not be consensual, so you have to investigate that, because even though they're prisoners, you obviously need protection from certain other prisoners. It's just very real and very fair, I think, and again, there's lots of questions that crop up, and it's really well done, and again, it's still relevant today because we still have prison problems and we still don't really know how to deal with crime and punishment. It's a really fascinating piece. So then we have The Finishing Line from 1977, which is 21 minutes. This is a absolute wonderful piece of filmmaking. This is another safety film. He was recruited to do a film to stop children playing on railway lines. So he came up with the idea of having, it starts with a child sitting on a bridge overlooking a railway line, and in the child's mind we hear an authoritarian voice saying, stay away from railways, they're dangerous. And the child is like, yeah, but what if we had a sports day on the railway line, and we could play games on the railway line? And then he's looking at an embankment, and then it comes into reality. There's a band, and it's a school sports day, but the events involve the railway line. Again, this is a film they couldn't make now. So there's 4 events. I think there's about 4 groups of school kids involved from 4 different schools. So we have like the under 10 fence break, where they break down a fence, run down the embankment, and cross the railway line up the other side to the finish line before the train comes. We have a stone throw, where all the school kids, there's 4 different teams in different colours, and they all throw stones at a passing train. We have 2 teams on either side of the railway track, and when the train comes, they have to run across the railway track and try and stop each other from getting to the other side. And the 4th one is the tunnel walk, where all the children walk into a darkened tunnel, and we see it from the other side, and there's a train coming into the tunnel. Again, could you make this film now? Probably not. Suffice to say, it was banned for 21 years. It has a history of his films being banned for some reason, but The Finishing Line was banned for 21 years. So the fence break, the first event happens, and a little girl falls down and is knocked unconscious, so she's lying on the train tracks, and her teammates try and come and get her, but they run away, and she's hit by the train. So you just see the ambulance people come down and take her away in a stretcher, and she's like, the kids do a really good job of playing dead. And the second event is the stone throw. So we see all the kids throwing the stones at the train, and then we cut inside the train and they get points for a smashed window. They get a point for passengers being injured and bleeding. One of them hit the driver and caused his face to be bleeding, so they get 6 points for that, I think. Obviously this is a fantasy. Obviously there was lots of complaints, and again it was banned for 21 years, but it is a fantasy and it is making obviously a point, but obviously not everybody got it. And then the third event, like I say, is the run across the train tracks and stop the opposing team getting to the other side when the train comes. So in this one it's just absolute carnage. There's about 10 dead kids at the end of the event. But that's nothing compared with the tunnel walk. So we see a whole crowd of kids walking into the darkened tunnel. We see the other side of the tunnel and the train go in. We don't hear anything, we just see 3 bloodied and bruised kids staggering out of the tunnel, and they get first, second and third place. And then the MC is like, yes, we'll place the other children when they appear. And you get some more kids who are stumbling out covered in blood and bruises. But then you get the parents coming out and the teachers coming out holding dead children and lining them up all along the railway track. I mean, it's quite effective. I mean, if it's not a deterrent for playing in the railway, I'm not quite sure what is. Like I say, the school kids do a great job of playing dead. Obviously you can see some of them, all of them, still breathing. Some do a better job of holding their breath than others. But it's such a, there's no music, there's no dramatic music. It's just very powerful as we see all these parents carrying these limp, dead children's bodies and laying them on the railway track, and then Frisch kind of pulls back and you just see all the bodies along the railway line. Again, can't imagine why it got banned for 21 years. And then we have Shooting the Message, which is a 35-minute interview from 2013 dedicated to John Krish's wife, who sadly died in 2012, the year before. And it's a great interview about how he started, the relationship between documentary filmmaking and feature filmmaking, and how sometimes studios can look down on documentary filmmakers as if they don't understand about filmmaking, which is obviously complete nonsense. It's just a wonderful interview. It is a wonderful release by BFI. Again, you can pick this up really cheaply. And again, another director I wasn't familiar with, even though I had one of his films, and obviously I'd seen, because he did more of those scary watch for cars when you're crossing the road films in the 70s. But John Krish, I would certainly pick this up and have a look, because it's some really interesting stuff. The prison one's fantastic, Captured is fantastic. I mean, they're all fantastic, to be honest, for different reasons, and for those same reasons they were banned. Yeah, so thanks very much for watching this rather strange edition of In the Frame on John Krish, and hopefully you'll join me again for more episodes of In the Frame. Please let me know your feelings about John Krish and what your favourite one of his films are, if you've seen them, and hopefully you'll join me again. So thanks very much for watching, appreciate the support. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying cheerio and watch out for trains.